open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without fear of victimization by the state agencies. We therefore, comrades, are in pursuit of state power, not for self-interest, but for revolutionary purpose, as described by the leader of the Great October Revolution of 1917, Lenin. Fellow fighters, the Third National People's Assembly is not a task we are undertaking for its own sake. It is an integral part of what constitutes a revolution premised on Leninism. It is Lenin who teaches us that revolutionary party constituted by revolutionary class and led by professional revolutionaries must always be in the practice of democracy. It is Lenin who writes, I quote, "The whole party organization is now built on a democratic basis. This means that all the party members take part in the election of officials, committee members, and so forth. That all the party members discuss questions concerning the political campaigns of the proletariat, and that all the party members determine the line of tactics of the party organizations." Close quote. Fighters, Lenin also taught us that we must work tirelessly to ensure that the higher standing bodies are elected, accountable, and subject to recall. This, along with democratic centralism, which Lenin described as a freedom of discussion and unity in action, forms the fundamental building an organic vanguard and revolutionary party that will liberate the working class. There is often a temptation and some confusion, in some cases, misuse of the concept of democratic centralism. At times, some commissars and fighters and people outside our movement attempt to impose their personal preferences and decisions on lower structures under the pretense of democratic centralism. But as Lenin teaches us, true democratic centralism requires that the decisions are made through genuinely democratic processes characterized by robust participation, open debates, persuasion, and collective agreement. Only such decisions born from the democratic process can be considered legitimate under the principle of democratic centralism. Once a decision is democratically reached, all of us as members of the organization are bound to respect and uphold it as a collective mandate. We are not here at the Third National People's Assembly because we have no other task. We are here because ideologically we are obligated to do so. Internal democracy is sacrosanct, and without it, we are doomed to follow the path of fascism. There is no single individual who possesses so much revolutionary wisdom that they can assume leadership responsibility without a democratic mandate. We must defend the principle, fighters, without any doubt that we are ideologically correct. There is no genuine revolution that can be led outside of a revolutionary and socialist democracy, not bourgeois democracy, but people's democracy. If you doubt democracy because it has potential to be corrupted, then consider if a collective can be corrupted, what makes you think an individual cannot be corrupted? We must never surrender a people's organization to the whims of an individual. It is for this reason, comrades, that all issues we have proposed in the public domain are open for discussion, agreement, and disagreement here at this National People's Assembly. We have diagnosed that we need to establish sub-regional structures and possibly do away with regional structures so that our movement and its leaders emerge organically from where they reside and lead their own communities. I wish to make emphasis that I feel very strong about this point. It is part of our organizational experience that the regional structures in the EFF are not fit for purpose. This reflects an error in organizational design inherited from the former liberation movement, which we must now do away with. Additionally, we have proposed that we establish an EFF Youth Command and do away with the EFF Student Command so that we may appeal to all the youth of South Africa. The gift of democracy is that this NPA will resolve on this question, and no single individual has the right to impose their will on anyone. Compatriots, internal democracy does not mean weakness or the absence of decisive leadership, which we are often accused for. The West has a tendency to create the impression that one of the problems confronting the continent and liberation movement is that of authority. The notion is that the absence of authority leads to freedom and prosperity, and that all attempts at running communist and socialist states have failed primarily due to the so-called authoritarian character of their leadership. President Robert Mugabe, brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, Captain Thomas Sankara, Commandant Fidel Castro, President of the People's Republic of China, and the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, are all accused of being authoritarian, as though the West is governed by the most democratic of ideas. Put differently, it is as though democracy itself lacks authority. Authority refers to the imposition of the will of one sector of society onto another. In democracy, authority refers to the will of the majority prevailing over the few. Authority is ever present. For any system to function, there must be a command from superior to subordinate. To demonize authority within the revolution, within the context of our war against capitalism, is either ignorant or a deliberate attempt to sow confusion. What liberal thinkers fail to understand is the hypocritical critique of authority is that authority exists under all economic and political systems, even in capitalism thrives through authority. Capitalism survives because the state which currently exists to protect the interest of the capitalist class operates with the authority of the monopoly on violence. Authority refers to the system, hierarchy, and legitimacy conferred by the people or bought by money and state violence in the case of capitalism. As socialists, we are engaged in a war against the most perverse global economic system known to humankind. The absence of authority in our revolution is a guarantee of failure. The West wants us to lack authority so that we become chaotic and disorganized. We must never allow our enemies to define us. We must always subject ourselves to the authority of leadership, a leadership that draws its legitimacy from the masses, not to reactionary and liberal definition of democracy, which strip the revolution of its existence. As Marxists, we seek the authority of the poor and the working class who do not own the means of production, to surpass that of the bourgeoisie. Marxism teaches us that the working class must destroy the authority of capitalism, which thrives on private property, profit-driven economies, and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. In simple terms, as Marxists, we believe in the authority of the people over the means of production, not the authority of the bourgeoisie over the people and the economy. So, no one commissars and fighters has any ideological basis to call the EFF authoritarian. The very capitalist system we live under thrives through authority, and it is the authority of the few. We must expect an aggressive onslaught from captains of industry and their media puppets. We have seen this especially since we celebrated a decade of existence at FNB Stadium, where we united more than 120,000 people under one roof as a symbol of common purpose and unity we share as a movement. There will be attempts to discredit our achievement as non-existent and disruptive. This is because the agenda is to undermine that which capital does not control. Our duty is to expose this and be consistent in our message that the EFF remains the only incorruptible and uncaptured organization capable of delivering socialism in our lifetime. Chairs, fighters and compatriots, one of our defining ideological features is our commitment to the ideals of Frantz Fanon. There are two aspects of Fanon's work that we must re-emphasize, which must always guide us whenever we seek to understand our role in the post-colonial world. Two chapters of particular significance are from his book, The Wretched of the Earth, The Pitfalls of National Consciousness and on Violence. The chapters are significant because one provides guidance on why liberation movement fail post-liberation, and the other diagnoses the necessity of violence and the inherent violence existing in a colonial and neo-colonial society. If we want to learn from the mistake of those who came before us, Fanon is instructive. He tells us what not to do and what not to become. The problem we confront internally as Africans is the persistence of liberation movement that sustain themselves on blackmail and through the use of law enforcement agencies to suppress the people's demands for the promises of liberation. Most recently, the liberation movement here in South Africa, when faced with getting rid of itself, aligned with our historical enemies in characterizing the EFF as a threat to the nation, because when ideas are lost, blackmail and sorghafar become the strategy. We are told that if the EFF is in government, it will be a doomsday for the people of South Africa. Fanon teaches and illustrates that liberation movements have no potential to lead us into the future. They are preoccupied with reminding our people of the past during every election cycle and periodically through meaningless like celebration of so-called Independence Day. These movements are led by a class of triumphalist politicians who resent the masses and categorize them as ungrateful for the leadership of the liberation movement. The former liberation movement began to build a wall between itself and the masses while impatiently accumulating petty wealth in alliance with the West. Fanon's lessons are important because he shows us how post-liberation national leadership reconstitutes itself as a mediator of capitalist interests, turning the nation into a brothel for imperialists. Fanon reveals that this decay in the relationship between the people and the liberation movement create a political class that no longer relates to the people. This political class loses sight of the continued poverty of the masses and its inability to reconstruct society away from the grip of colonialism. Because of this, the former colonizer tightened its grip over the resources of the former colony through concessions, loans, and other mechanisms that entrenches our underdevelopment and dependency on the West. The national bourgeoisie, also underdeveloped to lead strategic sectors of the economy, turns back to the colonialists and relies on the protection and support of Europeans. Their failure led to the collapse of not only the nation, but also the liberation movement itself. This is what the EFF must always guard against as our presence increases in governance and places of political influence. We must not resent our people because they do not vote for us, even though we fight bitterly for their dignity. We must resist the temptation of crumbs of imperialism, crumbs imperialists leave for the political class, and never forget the genuine purpose of our struggle for liberation.